Welcome to Stitch Club, presented by the Davenport Public Library. This edition of Stitch Club is about adding embroidery to your clothes. Today we'll talk about the tools and materials you'll need, choosing a pattern to stitch, and some ideas on placing your pattern on a piece of clothing. Let's get started. Adding embroidery to clothing is a great way to express your creativity, and it's a lot of fun. This is a plain white shirt that I added some moth motifs to the back of. You can embroider many different kinds of clothes. Jackets and denim shirts are always popular, but don't limit yourself. You can add stitching to jeans, dresses, baseball caps, even canvas shoes. You're only limited by your imagination and material. Let's talk about the materials you'll need. Of course, you'll need a clothing item. I recommend that you choose an item with a woven material with minimal stretch and not too heavy or thick. Good examples are jeans, cotton shirts, and lightweight jackets. You can stitch on knit fabrics such as t-shirts, sweatshirts, and sweaters, but if you are new to embroidery, I would save those for when you have more experience. Tension is more difficult to keep even on stretchy fabric. You'll need some embroidery floss in various colors. I'm using DMC, which is the standard for floss, but there are other brands available that will work just as well. You can also use sashiko thread or pearl cotton. Floss is relatively inexpensive, usually less than $1 a skein, and easy to find at fabric and craft stores as well as Walmart. I recommend that you stay away from wool because yarn won't hold up well to frequent washing. You'll also need an embroidery needle. This is a personal preference. Choose one that is comfortable in your hand and fingers and that has a large enough eye for the thread or floss that you choose. You'll also need an embroidery hoop. Although this is optional, I do recommend them. It makes keeping your tension even much easier. And of course, you'll need some thread snips. Now let's talk about transferring the design to your item of clothing. Of course, you can free stitch your pattern without drawing it first, but if you'd like a little more guidance, you can draw on the clothing with a marking tool. I like friction pins, which you can find in any office supply section. Lines from these pins will disappear when heat is applied, such as from a hairdryer or iron. You can also use tailor's chalk. Here's a couple examples of what it might look like, which can be wiped away with a damp cloth. However, a lot of times clothing material is too thick or too dark to see through to trace a design. That's where water-soluble fabric stabilizer comes in handy. There's more than one brand available. The one I'm using here is from Sulky. It comes in rolls or letter-size sheets and can be purchased at a fabric store or Amazon. What's really brilliant about it is that it can be run through a printer. So say you've purchased a pattern from an embroidery artist and you want to stitch it on a denim jacket or a dark piece of linen. You just photocopy your purchased design onto the Sulky Solvay. And you can also draw on the Sulky Solvay. Sulky Solvay is fuzzy on one side and sticky on the other. You want your print or drawing on the fuzzy side. Then you will peel the backing off and apply it to wherever you want to stitch your design. You will stitch right through the Sulky Solvay onto the fabric. When you're finished, rinse the material in warm water, letting it soak for a few minutes, and the stabilizer will dissolve, leaving only your beautiful stitching behind. Here's an example of a larger piece that I'm working on using the stabilizer. I purchased this pattern from embroidery artist Cassia Jocot, which came in PDF format. I simply printed the PDF onto the Sulky Solvay and then placed it on this dark green linen. You'll notice that I used some large basting stitches on the perimeter to keep the edges of the stabilizer laid flat. This isn't really necessary on small patterns, but it is helpful with larger ones like this. Another great use for water-soluble stabilizer is if you have a detailed design you want to stitch, such as this one by embroidery artist Sarah K. Benning. It's hard to trace onto fabric, even if the fabric is light enough to see through. The fabric moves and shifts as you move your pen. Here's an example of another complex pattern, also by Sarah K. Benning, that the stabilizer makes much easier to transfer. I simply printed it onto a piece of Sulky Solvay, And now all I need to do is place it on the piece of material I want to use and start stitching. And while these look complicated, they're actually quite simple using only 2 or 3 basic stitches. Just a lot of detail. A limited number of kits are available for this program on a first-come, first-served basis, but a kit is not required to participate. Let's go over what's in the kit. In the kit, you will find 4 small patterns printed on sulky solvay, a small amount of embroidery floss, and an embroidery needle. You can supplement your kit with additional colors of your choosing, and if you decide to stitch 3 or 4 of the designs, you will probably need additional floss to complete them. If you decide to use a single color, such as I did in the dove, which I'll show you in a minute, you will need additional floss. And of course, you will need to supply your own thread snips, embroidery hoop, which is optional but recommended, and of course, a piece of clothing. Of course, you do not need a kit to participate in the program. The materials and tools are easy to find, and you may already have some of them on hand. Most of them are fairly inexpensive and easy to find. The technique of using a water-soluble stabilizer works for any embroidery design, either of your own making or one you've purchased. If you would like to use the designs that are in this program, you can download a PDF with all 4. Then transfer the designs to your project. Check the notes below this video for a link to the PDF. Now let's take a look at the designs stitched up and talk about some ideas on where you might want to stitch your design. This first one is the dove. This design uses a variety of stitches: satin stitch, stem stitch, back stitch, and chain stitch. All of these are very simple stitches. I used one color, but you could use multiple colors, and you could choose to stitch as many of the motifs on the dove or as few. This one is placed above the pocket, which is a popular place to put any stitching. It shows up nicely and doesn't require a huge design. Now this pocket has a flap, but if it didn't, a good idea would be to stitch as if something were sitting in the pocket, like a little bouquet of flowers, or pens and paintbrushes. Of course, I would choose to include a book-themed design. This one is almost all satin stitch, with some optional outline stitch and some stem stitching. Again, very simple stitches, and your color choices are completely up to you. Also not surprising for me, a flower design. This one is mostly satin stitch, with chain stitch creating the leaves and French knots for the centers of the flowers. Don't be afraid of French knots. They really are not difficult at all. Of course, you can substitute them for satin stitch if you wish. Both of these last 2 designs were stitched above the cuffs, which adds a subtle but fun bit of interest to a plain shirt. Here's another design with lots of options. The design is just the outline of the tree, which is stitched with stem stitch. I made this one a 4-season tree with French knots for spring blooms, detached chain stitches for green leaves for summer, then more detached chain stitches for the orange and red leaves for fall, and finally white French knots for winter snow. You can do something similar or make a tree that is all the season of your choice. This design is stitched on the center back of the shirt, a great place for larger or multiple motifs. Other great places to stitch on a shirt or jacket include the back yoke and the collar points. For more ideas, search Instagram or Pinterest for embroidery on clothes or hand embroidery on clothes. I hope this episode has you excited to try stitching and given you lots of ideas. Take some time to gather your tools and materials and the item of clothing you're going to stitch, and join me again next week when I'll be showing you all of the stitches used in these designs. They're very versatile and very easy, I promise. Until next time, happy stitching.